My name is Daniel, and I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. 3 months ago, I was just another private investigator scraping by in Chicago, taking on cheating spouse cases and insurance fraud investigations. Then Richard Blackwood walked into my office with an offer that would change everything. Richard was the kind of wealthy businessman you read about in Forbes. Old money, real estate empire, the works. He sat across from my cramped desk in his perfectly tailored suit and made me an offer I couldn't refuse. $50,000 to watch his son Matthew for 3 months. Not arrest him, not dig up dirt, just watch and report back on his daily activities. "Oh, my son is rebellious," Richard had said, his jaw tight. 25 years old, and he's never held a real job. I need to know what he's doing with his time, who he's associating with. Think of yourself as my eyes and ears. The money was too good to pass up. I'd been behind on rent for 2 months, and this job would set me up for the rest of the year. So I took it, thinking it would be easy money watching some spoiled rich kid party his way through life. I was wrong about a lot of things. Matthew Blackwood lived in a converted warehouse loft in the Arts District. Apparently his one act of rebellion his father had allowed. The space was stunning, with floor-to-ceiling windows and enough room for 3 apartments. But what surprised me wasn't the luxury. It was how Matthew used the space. Half of it was set up as an art studio, canvases everywhere, the smell of oil paint thick in the air. I've been watching him for a week from a coffee shop across the street, documenting his routine for my reports to Richard. Matthew wasn't what I'd expected. Instead of sleeping until noon and hitting clubs, he was up early every morning, working on paintings with an intensity that seemed to consume him entirely. He rarely left the loft except for supply runs and the occasional trip to a small gallery downtown. It was during one of those gallery visits that our paths first crossed properly. I'd followed him inside, pretending to browse while keeping an eye on him. He was standing in front of an abstract piece, completely absorbed, when I accidentally knocked over a small sculpture on a pedestal nearby. The crash echoed through the quiet gallery, and suddenly every eye was on me, including Matthew's. "Smooth," he said, walking over with an amused smile. "Let me guess, you're not really here for the art." My heart hammered against my ribs. Had he made me? "What makes you say that? You've been staring at me for the past 10 minutes instead of looking at anything on the walls. Plus, you're wearing a leather jacket in a contemporary art gallery kind of gives you away." His eyes were this incredible shade of green, and when he smiled there was something both mischievous and genuine about it. I scrambled for an excuse. "I'm new to this art, trying to educate myself." "Really?" Matthew stepped closer, and I caught a faint scent of paint and something else, maybe cedar. "What draws you to this piece?" He nodded toward the painting he'd been studying. I looked at it properly for the first time. It was all swirling blues and grays, chaotic but somehow peaceful. "It reminds me of being underwater," I said honestly, "like floating in a storm." Something shifted in Matthew's expression. "That's actually a really beautiful way to describe it." He extended his hand. "I'm Matthew." "Daniel." I shook his hand, feeling callous as I hadn't expected on someone who'd never worked a day in his life. "Want to grab coffee, Daniel? I promise not to quiz you on any more art." I should have said no, should have made an excuse and left. Instead, I found myself sitting across from him in a small cafe, listening as he talked about the painting with a passion that was infectious. "The artist spent 2 years on that piece," Matthew was saying, his hands moving as he spoke. "She was going through a divorce, felt like she was drowning in her own life. But if you look closely, there are these tiny threads of gold woven through the chaos. Hope, maybe, or just a refusal to give up." "You know a lot about it." "I know the artist, Helene Chen. She's become a friend. The gallery owner, Marcus, he takes chances on artists who might not get shown anywhere else." Matthew paused, studying my face. "What do you do, Daniel?" "For work, I mean." The lie came automatically. Security consulting. It wasn't entirely false. Surveillance was a form of security work. Sounds mysterious? Not really. Mostly boring reports and risk assessments. We talked for 2 hours. Matthew was nothing like I'd expected. No arrogance, no entitlement. He asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. When he laughed at something I said, it was genuine. reaching his eyes, and when he mentioned his father, there was a tightness around those same eyes that spoke of old wounds. "Richard Blackwood isn't exactly the warm and fuzzy type," he said when I carefully probed about his family. "Everything's about business with him. Image, legacy. Sometimes I think he forgets he has a son and not just another asset to manage." The bitter edge in his voice made my chest tighten with guilt. I was literally being paid to spy on him for the very man who made him feel like an asset instead of a son. When we finally parted ways, Matthew turned back as he reached his car. "Same time tomorrow? There's another gallery I'd like to show you." I should have said no. Instead, I heard myself saying yes. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop, trying to write the weekly report for Richard. How could I tell him that his son was talented and passionate, that he spent his days creating beautiful things instead of wasting his life? How could I describe the careful way Matthew had talked about loneliness and purpose without betraying the trust he'd unknowingly placed in me? In the end, I kept it vague. Subject: maintains regular schedule. Visits art galleries, no concerning associations observed. The next day, Matthew took me to a smaller gallery tucked away in an alley. This one showcased local artists, and as we moved through the space, I began to notice something. Several of the pieces had small plaques that read "Anonymous Patron." When I asked about it, the gallery owner, a woman named Sarah with silver hair and knowing eyes, smiled mysteriously. "Someone believes in supporting artists who need a break," she said, "buys pieces and asks us to find homes for them with people who'll appreciate them but couldn't afford them otherwise." I caught Matthew's eye and saw something there, a quiet satisfaction that made me wonder. But when I asked him about it later, he just shrugged. "Probably some guilty rich person trying to buy their way into heaven," he said, but his tone was too casual, too practiced. We fell into a routine over the next few weeks. Coffee in the mornings, galleries in the afternoons, long conversations about everything from art to music to the books we'd read. Matthew introduced me to painters and sculptors, poets and musicians who gathered in small clubs, and showed me a Chicago I'd never known existed. And slowly, without meaning to, I began to fall for him. It wasn't just his looks, though Matthew was undeniably beautiful. Tall and lean, with dark hair that always looked like he'd run his fingers through it, and those green eyes that seemed to see everything. It was the way he listened when I talked, like every word mattered, the way he got excited about a particular brushstroke or color combination, his whole face lighting up, the way he was kind to everyone we met, from the gallery owners to the baristas, from the gallery owners to the baristas, from the gallery owners to the baristas. One evening, we were in his loft. He'd finally invited me up after I'd mentioned wanting to see his work. The space was even more impressive up close. Canvases everywhere in various stages of completion, the smell of paint and turpentine, natural light streaming through the massive windows even as the sun set. "These are incredible," I said, stopping in front of a series of paintings that seemed to capture the energy of the city at different times of day. "Matthew, you're really talented." He was standing behind me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You sound surprised." "Not surprised, just impressed." I turned to face him and found myself caught in his gaze. "Why don't you show these? I mean, in galleries?" "Because then it becomes about being Richard Blackwood's son instead of about the work." His voice was quiet, almost vulnerable. "I've seen what happens when people find out who my father is. Everything changes." The irony hit me like a physical blow. Here was Matthew, worried about people treating him differently because of his father, while I was literally being paid by that same father to spy on him. What if people could see the work without knowing who created it? I asked. "Anonymous patron?" Matthew smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I've thought about it. Maybe someday." We were standing very close now, and I could see flecks of gold in his green eyes. The air between us felt charged, electric. When Matthew reached up to touch my face, I didn't pull away. "Daniel," he said softly, and then he was kissing me. It was gentle at first, tentative, giving me the chance to pull away. Instead, I kissed him back, my hands finding his waist, pulling him closer. He tasted like the coffee we'd shared earlier and something uniquely him. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Matthew admitted, his forehead resting against mine. "Me too," I whispered, and it was the most honest thing I'd said to him since we'd met. That night changed everything. We didn't sleep together. Both of us seemed to understand that whatever was happening between us was too important to rush. Instead, we talked until dawn, sharing stories and secrets, learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with physical intimacy. Matthew told me about growing up feeling like a disappointment to his father, about the pressure to join the family business when all he wanted was to create something beautiful. I told him about my childhood in foster care, about becoming a PI because I wanted to help people find truth in a world full of lies. The irony of that last part wasn't lost on me. But I pushed the guilt aside. This thing between us felt too real, too important to destroy with the truth about why I'd sought him out in the first place. We began spending every day together. I moved my surveillance to his loft, claiming I worked better with natural light when Matthew asked about my laptop. The reports I sent to Richard became even more vague, focusing on mundane details while leaving out anything that mattered. Subject maintains regular schedule. No concerning behavior observed. Continues art-related activities. It was technically true, but it felt like a betrayal every time I hit send. 3 weeks after that first kiss, Matthew asked me to stay the night. We made love slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies with the same attention he brought to his paintings. Afterward, as we lay tangled in his sheets, Matthew traced patterns on my chest with his finger. "I love you," he said quietly, like he was testing the words. "I love you too," I replied, and meant it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. The guilt was eating me alive. Every morning when I woke up next to Matthew, every time he smiled at me or held my hand or shared something personal, I felt the weight of my deception growing heavier. I'd stopped sending Richard regular reports, instead sending brief messages claiming that Matthew was maintaining his routine and there was nothing notable to report. But I knew it couldn't last forever. The end came on a Thursday morning in November. I was in Matthew's kitchen making coffee when I heard his phone ring in the bedroom. He answered with a sleepy, "Hello?" that quickly turned sharp and alert. "What do you mean, someone's been watching me?" My blood turned to ice. I could hear Richard's voice through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. "A private investigator?" Matthew's voice was getting louder, angrier. "For 3 months? Why didn't you tell me?" I set down the coffee cup with shaking hands and walked toward the bedroom. Matthew was sitting on the edge of the bed, his face pale and his free hand clenched into a fist. "I don't care why you thought you needed to do it," he was saying. "You had no right at all." He hung up the phone and looked up to find me standing in the doorway. The expression on his face, hurt, betrayal, dawning realization, nearly brought me to my knees. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Matthew, I can explain." "How long have you been watching me for my father?" The question hung in the air between us like a blade. I could lie, could try to minimize it, but looking at Matthew's face, I knew I owed him the truth. "From the beginning," I whispered. Something crumpled in his expression. "The gallery, when we met, you were already?" "Yes." "And this?" He gestured between us, his voice breaking. "Was this part of the job, too?" "No," I stepped toward him, desperate to make him understand. "Matthew, no, what happened between us, what we have, that's real. That was never part of anything." "How would I know?" His voice was cold now, distant. "How would I know what's real and what's just you doing your job?" "Because I love you," the words came out raw, desperate. "I love you, and I've been trying to figure out how to tell you the truth without losing you." "Well, now you don't have to worry about that anymore." Matthew stood up, grabbing clothes from the dresser. "I want you gone, now." "Matthew, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" "That you took money to spy on me, that every conversation we've had, every moment we've shared, you've been reporting back to my father?" "I stopped sending real reports weeks ago. I couldn't." "Because you felt guilty?" His laugh was bitter. "How noble of you." I watched helplessly as he got dressed, his movements sharp and angry. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out." "How did you want me to find out, Daniel?" "On our anniversary? After we moved in together?" When exactly were you planning to mention that our entire relationship started as a business transaction? The words hit like physical blows because they were fair, every single one of them. I had no defense, no excuse good enough to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. I'm going for a walk, Matthew said, not looking at me. When I get back, I want you gone. All of your things, everything. And I never want to see you again. The door slammed behind him, and I was alone in the loft that had become more of a home to me than anywhere I'd ever lived. I packed my few belongings mechanically, my hands shaking. On his easel was a painting he'd been working on, a portrait of me reading by the window, painted with such care and attention that it took my breath away. I'd never seen myself the way he'd painted me. Peaceful, content, loved. I left a letter on his pillow, trying to explain everything I couldn't say. How I'd taken the job because I needed the money but stayed because I'd fallen in love with him. How every day with him had been the best of my life. How sorry I was for the deception, for the pain I'd caused. But words felt inadequate in the face of what I'd done. I never sent Richard a final report. Instead, I sent back the remainder of his money with a note saying the job was terminated. He called several times, but I didn't answer. For weeks, I drove past the loft, hoping to catch a glimpse of Matthew, but the windows stayed dark. I haunted the galleries we'd visited together, but he never appeared. It was like he'd vanished from the city entirely. 2 months later, I was walking past Sarah's gallery when I saw a crowd gathered inside. Through the window, I could see new paintings on the walls. Bold, emotional pieces that seemed to pulse with life and pain. The placard by the door read, "Anonymous, a solo exhibition." I knew, even before I went inside, that they were Matthew's. The paintings were incredible, raw and honest in a way his earlier work had hinted at but never fully achieved. There were pieces that captured the joy of new love, the safety of intimacy, the devastation of betrayal. In one corner hung the portrait of me reading, but now it was titled Before. "He's talented, isn't he?" Sarah appeared beside me, her silver hair catching the gallery lights. "Yes," I managed. "He is." "This is his first show." He was nervous about people connecting the work to his name, but sometimes art demands to be seen. She studied my face. "You're Daniel, aren't you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "He's been hurt," she said gently, "but he's healing. Art has a way of doing that." "Is he? How is he?" "Why don't you ask him yourself?" Sarah nodded toward the back of the gallery. I turned and saw Matthew standing near a painting I hadn't noticed before. It was abstract, but somehow unmistakably about forgiveness. Dark colors gradually giving way to light, chaos slowly resolving into peace. He looked thinner than I remembered. Well, there was something different in his posture, something stronger. Our eyes met across the crowded gallery, and for a moment the world went quiet. Then he was walking toward me, and I was walking toward him, and we met in the middle like we were always meant to. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi, the show is incredible. You should be proud." "I am, actually." He looked around the gallery, then back at me. "Sarah told me you've been coming by, looking for me. I wanted to apologize, properly I mean, and to tell you that I meant what I said about loving you." Matthew was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "I read your letter, all 47 pages of it." "You counted?" "I'm thorough." The hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "You said a lot of things in that letter." "All true, I know. That's what made it so hard to read." He sighed. "Daniel, what you did? It hurt. It still hurts. But I've spent 2 months painting through it, thinking through it, and I've realized something." "What's that?" "You made a choice. When you took my father's money and agreed to spy on me, you made a choice. But you made other choices too. You chose to stop sending him real information. You chose to fall in love with me. You chose to try to protect me, even when it meant betraying the person who was paying you." Hope fluttered in my chest, tentative and fragile. "Matthew, I'm not saying I'm ready to forgive you completely. Trust isn't something you can just switch back on, but—" He looked around the gallery again, at his paintings hanging on the walls, at the people discussing his work with enthusiasm and respect. "I think I'm ready to try, if you are." "More than ready," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "Then maybe we can start over. Properly this time. No lies, no deception. Just us." I reached for his hand, and when he didn't pull away, I felt something inside me that had been broken begin to heal. I'd like that, more than anything. Good, Matthew said, squeezing my fingers, because I was hoping you'd say that. As we stood there in the gallery surrounded by his art, by the visual representation of his journey through pain toward healing, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most broken places. Sometimes trust can be rebuilt stronger than it was before. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love can survive even the worst mistakes. We had a long way to go, Matthew and I. There would be difficult conversations, moments of doubt, the slow work of rebuilding what had been damaged. But looking at him now, seeing the forgiveness in his eyes and the hope in his smile, I knew we'd make it. After all, we'd already survived the hardest part.